Everybody ready? Partner?
Yeah.
Judges? All right, let's get this going. Today's resolution is that the Supreme Court of the United States should rule that people in the United States have a Fifth Amendment right to refuse to decrypt or unlock their electronic devices. So starting with the Observation 1, the resolutional analysis, all definitions will be contextual. This leads us to our weighing mechanism. Today we're going to be weighing this with net benefits, meaning that if we as the affirmative prove to make the world a better place, then we win. If not, the negation wins. This leads us into our background. So first, under the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be witnessed against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. This leads us to our plan, that the Supreme Court of the United States will rule that people have a Fifth Amendment right to refuse to decrypt or unlock their electronic devices. This leads us to the solvency. By passing the plan, we are upholding the Fifth Amendment, and therefore we are promoting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This leads us to our Advantage 1, titled the Fifth Amendment. A is the uniqueness. Our first point here is that the Fifth Amendment protections are key to due process of law. The second point here is that the Fifth Amendment is under siege from multiple directions. The subpoint under point 2 is that people who evoke the Fifth Amendment are held in contempt of court. So if you do not hand over your devices in court, you will get a contempt of court, which is illegal, and you will therefore accrue more and more penalties. So this leads us to our link. I'll get you at the bottom 5 times. The plan rescues the rule of law from the brink. So this leads us to our link story, that if we do not pass this plan, rule of law will crumble. The second link here is that rule of law is key to our democracy. So that leads us to our impacts. First is that democracy will collapse if we do not pass this plan. With the crash of democracy, this means that a dictatorship will rise. And once there's a dictatorship enabled, there will be human rights abuses everywhere. This is going to lead to dehumanization of people and animals, and basically every person in the United States will be dehumanized if we allow our democracy to collapse. This dehumanization is going to lead to death, and it is going to lead to war. Therefore, it is imperative that we pass this plan to stop the collapse of democracy and to enable the Fifth Amendment right, and again, to promote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yes, your question.
You would agree that in order to turn over their iPhone to, say, the FBI, they have to actually be suspected of a crime?
Not necessarily. The FBI can request it without necessarily having any warrant.
Yeah, under this law, they could have no warrants to ask for that property.
All right. Now recognize the leader of opposition for constructive speech that should not exceed 4 minutes. All right, Taylor, can you start us off with a roadmap so we know what order to put our flows in?
Okay, so first I'm going to go ahead and start off with our disadvantage. So we're going to start off case with our disadvantage, and then we're going to go on case to their plan and their advantage.
You should paper for the disadvantage and then back to your existing class. Awesome. Good idea to change pen colors right now.
Okay, and I just want to thank you guys all for being here. I know this is a class, but debate's really cool, and you guys will learn to love it, I promise. So we're going to go ahead and start. So let's go ahead and start with some background. We're on our disadvantage 1, and we're going to go ahead and title this safety. So some background for this is on December 2nd, 2015, there were 14 people killed and 22 others were severely injured in a terrorist attack consisting of a mass shooting and an attempted bombing in San Bernardino. So our uniqueness is currently in the status quo. Apple does not have to comply with the FBI and unlock phones. So even if people have some very serious intel towards a group of like terrorists, that there is some very serious intel of an attack that is being planned, Apple does not have to comply, and people don't have to hand over their devices in order for them to be checked. And so that leads us to our link. And the plan passes and sacrifices safety and security. Now, safety being a problem towards your own self, and security being to your belongings. Internal link is the FBI has intel, and they have no way of confirming that this is true. So this doesn't, this also can affect the way that people, even the terrorists, this takes away their rights because the FBI can't confirm that this is true. They can't confirm it. And so our second internal link is FBI turns to a third party and sacrifices the safety and security of the U.S. Our internal link 3 is terrorists are able to commit these awful acts because they aren't being checked back for. And we can't find the ties to the terrorist organizations that they are tied to. And this leads to impacts of more deaths in the U.S. and it leads to more terrorist attacks happening every day. So let's go on to their top of case. So with their background, they say that they talk about what the Fifth Amendment does and what it is provided. And yes, this is not necessarily going against it, but in order to receive the intel, or in order to check back for the intel that the FBI has, they need to be able to check back for these attacks. And they need to be able to get the information that they need. And then so on to their first advantage. So again, in their link, it says that people will have their Fifth Amendment right being evoked. And the thing is, they're not taking this, they're not taking their phones away, they're not confiscating it, they just want to check. If they have nothing to hide, then they should be able to hand their devices over and clear themselves. Because if you were innocent, wouldn't you want to be cleared of being told against something? Like if you were innocent and you were being convicted of something that you have nothing to do with, wouldn't you want to be able to clear yourself and be considered free and go against that? So if they have nothing to hide, then they should hand it over immediately. And yes.
Do you know how long they would have possession of the materials?
I don't think it would be super long because as long as it is already decrypted and there is nothing being hidden in the places, in inscriptions, then it wouldn't take very long at all to clear their names. Okay, and anything else? And time's up.
All right, going back to the government now. Remember, if government constructive speech should not be longer than 4 minutes. On, where are we headed? Hey, John, you take the top thing, put it out like that, you're going to be good to hang on the edge of the podium. It's like this.
Like here?
So take the,
No, the little
like
thing
this.
Oh, this one.
Has an extra nub.
That's, these are fancy timers.
2 years in. Where are we headed?
We're going to do an order called same order. We're going to talk about the disadvantage first, then we're going to go to top of case, and then we're going to talk on the advantage.
All right, and you should be back, so no new sheets of paper. Be back using whatever pen you loaded the very first reading. No, I'm in front of you.
All right, are we ready?
Yeah.
Let's begin on the disadvantage, first with the uniqueness. Now, the uniqueness point here is that in the SQO, Apple does not have to unlock phones. However, this resolution is about whether or not individuals have to unlock their own phones, not whether or not Apple needs to provide a backdoor into them. So simply put, this is a non-unique argument. Next, onto the link. They're talking about how the plan manages to save safety and security. But we have to remember what's at stake here. In the words of Benjamin Franklin, he who will give up essential liberty for a little temporary safety will find neither safety nor liberty. And this is the heart of the affirmative's argument, is that by giving up these freedoms of the Fifth Amendment, we will find ourselves in an unsafe, insecure, undemocratic society. Yes?
Can you appreciate your security if you're dead?
No, but I think that people who are not free do not appreciate their security either. Simply put, North Korea may be secure from foreign invasion, but they're not free. And I don't think the North Koreans generally tend to approve or appreciate that. Now, moving on to the internal link. So anyways, I guess what I'm going to say here is that we're going to turn this link here, how ultimately that people find themselves without safety or security because it'll take away the liberty which is necessary for upholding it. On the internal link, they said the FBI cannot confirm the intelligence. But the thing is, the FBI and the CIA already try to sneak into these groups using the encryption, but just on between devices. That's why people are always trying to come up with things like WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram, which have secure communications. And that is ultimately where the battle between encryption and freedom is going to be between the government and the outside. It's not going to be within a single person's phone. It's going to be on the internet. So they say that terrorists cannot be checked back against, and this is going to lead to lots of deaths. But ultimately, the United States is always going to have the tools to be able to combat terrorism. There have been many attacks and attempted attacks since 9/11. There have been attempted bombings on planes. There have been countless other events which the government doesn't even necessarily talk about because they don't want to give up what's called methods and sources. That they need to be able to continue to fight this. And that's ultimately, this is not something that's essential to what they're doing. Moving on to the top of case. They say here that it is not against the Fifth Amendment. This simply isn't true. When the Fifth Amendment says explicitly that no person shall bear witness against themselves, if you are forced to unlock your electronic device with the communications you have had, you are being forced to give testimony of the things you have said before against yourself, whether or not you're innocent or guilty. This is a stab into the very heart of what our Constitution means, the very protections that our founders insisted that we have. I will get to you at the end of the advantage if I have time. Moving on to the advantage. They put an argument on the link, and they say that not taking phones away, and that, quote, the innocent have nothing to fear. This is an argument I have heard before, I believe, in a book called 1984. This is not what we want the government to be doing. So ultimately pull across all of our uniqueness points here, that Fifth Amendment protections are key to due process. Pull across our link and our internal link that if we do not pass plan, rule of law crumbles, that it's key to democracy. Pull across all of our impacts, democracy collapses, dictatorships rise, human rights abuses, dehumanization, death, and war. They have not contested that we get these impacts if you do not vote for plan. So you must absolutely vote for plan.
All right. Now moving into the member of opposition constructive speech. You should change the pen color of that so you can use it to flow the negative.
Sorry. Is it correct? 4 and 0 0, and then start when you want to go.
There we go.
Where are we headed, Zoe?
We're going to start just going down the basics of the flow. The first page, I don't want to confuse you guys too much. We're going to start with the first page, go to the next page, and then finally end on the disadvantage, because I believe that's really important.
So you're doing disadvantage last?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to hit on that one.
So top of case, advantage 1, disadvantage.
All right, if everyone is ready and has the right pen,
Okay.
let's begin. Starting off at the top of the case, talking about the Fifth Amendment rights. He said that everyone has the basic right to keep that information to themselves. But what the affirmative team is ignoring is the stance that these are criminals. These are people being inspected for a possible crime. They essentially lose their Fifth Amendment rights when they commit a crime. This act that the government is partaking in is investigating further into whether or not this person is actually doing something illegal. Yes, that's like your first question.
Are innocent people sometimes suspected of crimes?
I would agree to that, yes. There are certain instances that this does occur. But we see in today's world, such as the San Bernardino shooting, is that we had a criminal that committed a heinous crime. But the problem was that Apple was not allowing the government to inspect his phone. He had ties to other terrorist organizations. but the government had no ability to investigate that because of these rights. But what we see is that these criminals lose their Fifth Amendment rights once they commit a crime. And we see that as a very big problem in today's world. Yes, let's take your second question.
But if they haven't been convicted of a crime, how can we take away these rights?
When you're being investigated for a crime, you essentially lose the right to your Fifth Amendment rights. When you're being convicted for murder, you essentially lose the right to hide all this information. When you're looking into an active or the act of a criminal, we have to be able to see all sides of the story. In order to do that, we have to be able to gain all that information. Yeah, I'll take your final question.
Doesn't the Constitution refer to, quote, inalienable rights, which suggests that they cannot be taken away for any reason because these rights are so essential to democracy and...
In that stance, every criminal in prison has the right to go out and live his life. It has the right to bear arms. We take away those rights once the crime has been committed. Now let's move down to the advantage responses. That'll be your second page. The point that they brought up was not taking the phones away, or their responses of 1984, talking about the book 1984 by George Orwell. And talking about how we're taking away these people's rights. But what we see is that these criminals, they're taking away the rights of the people that they're attacking. They're taking away the rights of life from these people. We see that we need to take this into account. The FBI is simply investigating these crimes. They need all the information to be able to convict these terrorist organizations. And we see that that information is necessary. Now let's move down to the disadvantage, because I believe that is very important in today's debate round. He said that these are individuals that are having their rights taken away, not the Apple organization. You can bring my first point up of this is after death. Like the example of the San Bernardino shooting, they couldn't exactly have the guy unlock the phone because I believe he passed away. What about the instances in which terrorists are no longer alive to unlock the iPhone? How are they going to be able to know all the information? The terrorist organizations that they're in compliance with. We need to be able to have this information. We need to be allowed to give the government access to this. Now moving down to the points of the rights of the people. We agree that people do have the right to bear arms, right to happiness, right to their information, but they lose that right when they commit a heinous crime. And we see that the people that the government are trying to look into have lost that right. Now moving down to their turn of basically, we are losing both safety and security. My point here today is that if you don't have safety, you can't necessarily have security. If we don't give the government the ability to ensure our safety, you're not going to be able to enjoy your security on your iPhone. It is better to have your information maybe looked into once or twice if you're an actual threat, rather than hiding all this information and having a lot of potentially bad things happen to a large amount of people. Now moving down to their point of tools to contact, basically talking about how this is just a tool for terrorists and we don't actually need to access this. What we see is that there have been successful attacks in the past. We see this in San Bernardino. We see this in Paris recently. These attacks could have been prevented if we had the information, if we were able to look into the possible terrorist ties that were related to these organizations. So when we look back at the resolution, we see that we should strongly be disregarding the affirmative team and agree that people's rights are essentially there still, but not the rights of criminals. We should be allowed to investigate into the cell phones of those criminal sources, and that is why I urge you to negate the resolution. Thank you.
All right, folks, that wraps up our constructive speeches. We're now moving into the last 5 minutes of the debate and the rebuttals. So for this next speech, you're not going to want to change pen colors because it stays on the negative side. I hereby recognize the Leader of Opposition to give the first rebuttal of the speech.
Okay. And then I'm going to spend the whole time on disadvantage.
This is that back to back.
Okay, so page 1,
What's that?
first sheet.
It's up to where you go.
And this one's 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Where we headed?
Okay, so we are actually going to spend this whole entire 2-minute speech on our disadvantage. Okay. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and go on to our disadvantage, but first we are going to cross-apply our background and their argument on the Fifth Amendment right. Correctly? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and start at the top of case with our, not top of case, sorry, the top of the disadvantage with what my partner said about after death. So we can't get the information that we need to go against these big terrorist organizations. Now, after these people die, most of these happens in suicides, like most of these are suicide bombings, like these terrorist attacks, like they don't make it out of this either. So we can't get the information that we need of who they're working with. Like no one's going to get justice for these terrible acts that are being put against them. And then so, So back to their, the link term they gave us, it's you don't have safety if you don't have security. That's what my partner said based on their link term. So we're gonna go ahead and go back to the opposition, or not the opposition, the affirmative brought up 9/11 earlier, so we're gonna talk about that really quick. 9/11 was a huge thing. Today, it's 9/11 today, right? Yeah, see, it's a huge thing that happened, and after that, we had to take extremely serious measures against security. And like the reason that we took such huge measures in security is because that happened in 9/11. And so I'm going to go ahead and say that we need to evolve. We need to evolve our security measures in order to check back for terrorism. Because if we don't evolve this Fifth Amendment right, then terrorism is just going to keep happening. AKA with 9/11, like we evolved it, and since then we have.
Point of order?
Yes.
Saying that we need to evolve our security technology is essentially a new argument coming out of the yellow law.
Oh, sorry. Point of order. Sorry, what?
I'm saying that we need to evolve our security.
Oh, in a way, I was just saying that we need to be able to check back against them. Like you brought up 9/11 and how you brought up 9/11, and I was bringing up 9/11 as well.
Since this is a demo, we're gonna take it under consideration.
Okay.
I know as a judge right now, you get to weigh in whether or not you thought this was a new argument or if this was something that was brought up previously in the debate. So you have 10 seconds left, you can continue making that argument, we'll find out if they take it into consideration or not.
Okay. And then again, I just want to say that we are weighing this on net benefits, so it's whatever is better for us. And so what needs to be taken under consideration is that if we do not evolve and we do not, thank you.
All right, and finally, we'll turn it back over to the Prime Minister for the final speech of the debate. Should not exceed 3 minutes.
You've got 3 minutes.
Where's the go? On the flow? Where's the
Oh, that's just kind of something.
Okay, I'll just throw it in here.
It's a rebuttal. You can. It doesn't have to flow anywhere.
Cool.
I only have 2 minutes.
3.
3.
Oh gosh. Sorry, rebuttals are my jam. Okay, you guys ready? Awesome. Thank you for sticking through this debate with us.
Can you write down?
Yeah, so I'm going to do an overview. I'm going to do some impact calculus. I don't know if you guys have talked about that much yet in class, but I'll kind of show you what that is. And then I'm going to go through the flow of DA, top of case, and then our advantage. And just like I'll signpost as I go. All right, you guys ready? Judge, you can see this that there are 2 worlds. One in which we pass this plan and promote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or one in which we do not pass the plan and see the dire ramifications of the impacts. We are winning today on magnitude, meaning that our impacts blow up. We are winning on our impacts because they were dropped on their speech, and you can flow through that the democracy will crash, dictatorship will rise, there will be dehumanization occurring, and this will lead to death and war. So we are winning on magnitude of those impacts. So also, there is a single core issue at heart of this debate. Its due process of law is key to democracy. The negative dropped our uniqueness points 1 and 2, which say that they have granted us our internal links and our impacts and our advantages. If we do not pass the plan, all of these impacts will happen. Like I said, death, human rights abuses, mistreatment, and torture of citizens. We will have a dictatorship when democracy falls. So furthermore, looking at the DA1, criminals is a really vague term. Not all people who are accused of crimes are terrorists or criminals. Also, like, they brought up this point that, like, it would have helped in Paris, but we're talking about domestic issues, not foreign, so you can drop that from the record. And furthermore, like, not all criminals are bad people or terrorists, and that's really blown up in this debate. We need to look at this as the individual. Individual people will have their things searched, their devices searched, which leads to a breakdown of liberty. Furthermore, moving on to the top of case, again, as my partner stated, like, we have this thing called inalienable rights, and even people accused of crimes deserve to have human rights and human rights enforce upon them. So furthermore,
People accused of crimes are not convicted of crimes.
people accused of crimes are not convicted of crimes, and furthermore, we need to look at this at even a lower level than just terrorism. Like, terrorism is a really wide-scale thing that happens every once in a while, and it is terrible, but there are people who are accused of crimes that would have their things looked through all the time that could lead to darker and deeper ramifications as shown in the impacts. So moving on to our advantage, sorry. Again, where's my, oh, thanks. Again, this leads to the democracy collapsing, this leads to dictatorship rising, this leads to human rights abuses, death, and war. So it is imperative, Judge, that you vote in favor of the affirmative today. We have shown that we are net beneficial, and without this plan, we will see these impacts indefinitely. Therefore, vote in favor of us today. Thank you.
Another big round of knocks for all 4 of our debaters.